Okay, welcome to Fantasy Happy Hour NHL edition. It should be pretty fun being able to switch it up for some football, get into a little bit of NHL fantasy and DFS action. Today we're going to talk about the North Division for the 2020-2021 season, which is all the Canadian teams. So this should be pretty exciting. We're going to, just to give some context, I guess, this won't be just for DFS per se. It'll really be for also like fantasy and keeper leagues. And I don't know how Tarin did his picks, but how I did mine is we're going to skip over the main guys on a team because those are pretty obvious for the most part. And we're going to try to help with some either sleeper picks, some rookie picks, or some guys who might get overlooked. And for my two kind of scenarios, I did it in work leagues. So where you're typically drafting 10 to 15 players, and usually there's 10 to 15 owners. And then also keeper leagues and dynasties. And, I'll try to differentiate between the two. But yeah, anything to add on there, Tarin?
No, I was kind of looking. The only thing I'd say is I looked at like average draft position for most fantasy leagues, like Yahoo's rankings right now, when I took into account the guys and maybe where I see some advantages in taking them a little earlier than where they're sitting, especially with the way the league's shaping up. Like with this new schedule in the NHL, you got to watch goalies because you're going to see backups play substantially more. So I noted a lot of some goaltenders that you might want to take that might take over that role. So it's important to look at this new look schedule and kind of think about a shortened fantasy season. So why don't you lead us off? I think who do we have up first?
First team we're going to talk about, Ottawa Senators. Now this is in no particular order or anything, just kind of first team that was in the divisions on Fantrax. So Ottawa Senators, they're going to be an exciting team this year. There's a whole bunch of options because they have so much young players. They have a lot of experimenting to do to see how their team's going to shape up over the next few years. Lots of prospects, deep with the prospects, and kind of an interesting team. This is one of those teams where I think you're going to find a lot of guys that will surprise you, and you'll see guys picking them up either on the waiver wire or people just taking gambles on them in keeper leagues and taking them now for a lower price point than what they project to be. So one of the first guys I'll talk about, probably won't be a surprise if you're an experienced fantasy player, but Thomas Chabot, 6 goals, 33 assists last year, 4.2 fantasy points per game, top pairing guy. If you're experienced in fantasy, you're going to know about him, and he's going to be valued pretty high. But this is one of those players where if you're in a draft with your friends and colleagues at work, he'll probably be overlooked and not be picked until the later rounds 7 to 12. And as someone you could really jump on, that'll probably get you over 40 points, I project, this year. Solid player. Again, he'll probably get power play time. And I think he's traditionally probably overlooked in your casual leagues. Second guy, when we go to a little bit middle depth here, Connor Brown, 43 points last year, 3.8 fantasy points per game if you're in the leagues that are counting face-offs and hitting and stuff. So he's a great middle player. Again, with a lot of their top-end talent with, Dadonov, Kachuk, a few of the other prospects now. He's one of those guys that's going to be playing top 6 minutes, I think anyways, and really being able to be a depth piece that'll really help elevate your team to that next level to get you further down in the playoffs, especially when it comes to that. Third one is a bit of an unknown, but if you're in a keeper league, you probably would want to pick him up if he's free right now, or try to trade for him if the people who have him don't know exactly his worth, and that's Drake Batherson. 10 points last year in his 23 games. Came in at 3.7 fantasy points per game. So if you're playing in a league that's doing, everything for points, anything over 3 is, typically pretty good. Anything over 5 or 5.5 would be like your top end players. And then if you're getting over like 6, 7, well, that's your elite. So for him to be 23 games last year, 3.7, I think he'll be full-time NHLer playing middle 6 this year, probably get power play 2 time. He's one of these guys where if you're playing in a casual league in a redraft, you will probably be able to get him at the end if he's still available. He might not even get drafted, and you'll be able to pick him up during the year if you get an injury or something. So a guy I really like. I have him in all my leagues, and I think he makes the step this year. And then one sleeper pick, Alex Galchenyuk. Really bad past couple seasons, coming in at $1 million or $1.5 million this year in Ottawa. Kind of like his could be a Duclair 2.0 where we see a resurgence and his value skyrockets, and then you can trade him at the end of the year for probably more than what you'd get. So I mean, I wouldn't put all your eggs in his basket, but someone to watch out for. What are you thinking for Ottawa there, Tarin?
Well, the one thing that I looked at a lot is that when you look at some of these NHL teams that aren't typically expected to be good, so you're expecting a losing season, guys on their top line are still going to get points. And when I saw that Evgeny Dodonov is getting averagely drafted 170th, that's like, what is that, 8th, 9th, 10th round? That guy's going to play top line minutes and top power play time. So to me, that's a pick that you can take much earlier than 170th, and you're going to get a guy on a top line. And in fantasy, you don't care if the team loses a lot because the top line players still get points. So he's expected to play with Tkachuk and whoever they put with that line. And he had 80 some points last year, or 81 goals in his last 3 seasons. He's a scorer. He doesn't play like PK or anything, but he is a power play guy. So that's a guy you can expect big points in that draft position. Is too late in my opinion. And then kind of a stockpile bench guy, the guy that got drafted 3rd overall, Tim Strutzel. He was the third pick overall in the draft. Early reports are that he's expected to make an impact early on this roster because they don't have a lot of room. And I could be wrong here, but I was reading that he's playing in Germany. He's going to play in the World Juniors, so you won't see him for a little bit. But he had 7 goals and 27 assists in Germany last year. And so they're kind of I have another guy later in this segment, but he's a guy that could make an impact. So if you got a 15th round pick and you just want to keep the guy for next season, this might be a good option. I'll pass it back to you because I'm not sure what team's up, but
yeah, we're going to go to Vancouver here. Again, a nice solid core. Their younger pieces that are in the lineup are, going to be high end or elite with, Pettersson, Besser. We already know what Horvat is. But there are some other pieces here that could really boost your fantasy team that might get overlooked. The first one probably won't get overlooked this year, might have last year. Quinn Hughes, elite player here, 8 goals, 45 assists last year. Top pairing guy. If you're playing in a fantasy league with salaries, he's still in his entry-level contract. So huge bargain. I expect him to cross over into 4+ fantasy points per game this year. Easily get the same amount of points, but probably more. Just that now he'll be more comfortable. 2nd season in the show. Someone you could probably get in rounds 4 to 6. I think still, because the first 3 rounds, typically you're seeing forwards and goalies go. So one of those young D men that you really want to jump on quickly, I think his value is only going to go up from here. Second pick, my only other pick for Vancouver, Thatcher Demko. Again, good pick here. He's going to be splitting the role with Holtby, but as we've seen in the past or the recent years here, Holtby has had his starting job taken from him a couple times. And with a shortened season, lots of back-to-backs this year, this could be a great pick, depending on your league setup. If you have multiple goalies, I would not be surprised if we can see Demko get 25 games played this year. And in one where you're counting all the points, he's 6.25 fantasy points per game, which is great for a goalie. And someone I'd definitely invest into right now, as it's only going to be going up from here because he will be a starter at some point. Tarin, what are you thinking for the Canucks?
Yeah, well, Thatcher Demko was on my list here, and most of it just stemmed from his playoff debut last year. I think he played 4 games. He had a .985 save percentage and a shutout. So, I mean, he was looking great at the end of that season. And I do think this season's going to revolve around a 50% timeshare. Sorry, my cat is attacking something in the background and distracting me. But yeah, like overall, I think he's going to play a lot more with this new season look, and he's a great goalie in a backup role. The other guy I picked is more of a DFS kind of darling, and I loved him last year, and that's Alex Edler actually on defense. He averages 3 or more block shots a game. So if your league has block shots in it, he's an awesome play. He tends to have a good plus minus through the season. And he was kind of a darling for me in DFS, but I think in a season long that includes block shots and some plus minus, he's a good depth guy to add as like your 4th, 5th D-man that you kind of need to rotate in when you don't have guys playing that night. So kind of look to him. And then, we can move on we get that debut of my home city, I guess, or used to be my home city versus your home city to debut the NHL season. I think it's Oilers, Canucks. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, well, let's move on to the Montreal Canadiens here. They're another interesting team with kind of a weird core. It's a little bit odd. I don't follow them too closely. I do have a few of their players in some of my leagues, but they do have some really good young players. The first one being Nick Suzuki, had his first season this past year, 13 goals, 28 assists, 3.7 fantasy points per game. So really, really good season for a rookie debut. Again, I expect him to take a bit of a step and go even a little bit higher this year, a little bit more, what's the word I'm looking for? Production. That's what I was looking for.
There you go.
And yeah, he's another player I think you could probably get lower on in your drafting, past round 8 easily. He'll still be available, and I think he could easily get you, 45, 50 points this year, depending where he's slotted. Moving on into a bit more of a gamble, but if you're in a keeper league, he won't be a stranger. Cole Caufield. This should be his rookie year coming up. Again, if you're playing in a casual league, he probably won't even get drafted until the later rounds, especially if you do it before the season's even started. He probably won't even get drafted. But I think he comes into the league and gets you 20, 30 points easily this year. Well, that's not crazy. If you're getting them at the end, it could be a great pickup, especially if you have injuries. And then if you're in a keeper league, well, I mean, this guy's probably already gone, but if he's available, you take him. What do you have for notes on Montreal here?
I had very little too. It's a hard team to follow, and they're not typically a great fantasy team. I mean, you can look to their D-man. Petrie played a lot, and he has PP1 time now, so he had a ton of points last year along with Weber. But I had Nick Suzuki written down. The guy became kind of that number one center, number one power play center. Plays on the second line, but is on the number one power play as a center. He was playing 20 to 22 minutes on average in the last half of the season there. And so I think he had 41 points by the end of it, and they expect this to be now his breakout on top of the great season he had last year. So that was really all I had in Montreal.
Perfect. We'll move on to my favorite team here, the Leafs. Leafs have a big core that are going to be taken in the first 3 rounds. I mean, you're going to see Matthews, Marner, Tavares, Nylander, Freddie Anderson, Riley all go probably in the first 3-4 rounds of most leagues. So I won't touch on them because they're all self-explanatory, but I'll get into a few of the other guys that'll probably get overlooked. First one being Zack Hyman, great fantasy player and DFS player. He's typically pretty cheap, and in DFS and in fantasy, he's usually left in, until the later rounds. Hits lots, blocks lots, tries to shoot lots, but still puts up, 21 goals last year, 16 assists, plays on the top line. 4.5 fantasy points per game. Again, a great depth piece, cheap too, which is always good if you're playing in a salary league. I love him, and I think he's one of those players that if you get him in round 5 or 6, it's an absolute steal because he always plays top 6 with the Leafs with Matthews, and he's going to get you points. Second one here, Ilya Makayev. Again, someone I think doesn't even go in the top, might go in, depending on the type of league, probably will be shifted down into rounds 10 to 15, but he'll be playing top 6 minutes this year, relatively unknown outside of Toronto. Last year was his first year, came from the KHL, 23 points in 39 games. Then he had that, it was less than that, it was about 23 points in 30 games. And then he had kind of a devastating wrist injury where he was out for majority of the season. Easily would have put up 40, 50 points. He was playing with Marner and Tavares. Looked great too. So again, I think this is another sleeper pick on the Leafs that, typically will get overlooked by all the other star power. And if you get him in the later rounds, I think he will be a great, great pickup this year. And he's relatively cheap. I believe he makes $3.5 million. So again, and I think he'll be cheap in DFS this year, especially at the start of the year until he starts putting up points. So great pick. One more I'm going to touch on. Again, a bit of an unknown, but Rasmus Sandine, a good keeper pickup here. As the Leafs decor is kind of in shambles and no one really knows who's going to make it. I don't know if he'll make consistent minutes this year and play in every game. I do expect him to get, at least 25 to 30 games in, though. I wouldn't be surprised because they're going to try, by next year, he will be full-time Leaf. But so he'll be a bit more of a gamble, I think. Probably wouldn't take him in your casual leagues or like a redraft, not yet anyways. But if he's in a keeper league, definitely hold on to him, as he will easily be 3.54 fantasy points per game and a solid D pickup on your core there. What are you thinking for the Leafs here, Tarin? Do you have anyone?
I can dive into the Leafs just because you're more of a Leafs guy and you have the depth knowledge. All I would say about the Leafs is in DFS and fantasy is when you have a team that's very high scoring and can give up a lot of goals as well, like the Leafs, I think of two teams right off the top of my head. Colorado is a good example of a team who gives up a lot but scores a lot, so they're just great for fantasy, and Toronto's kind of the same to me. So if you can get auxiliary pieces, even if you have to jump on the waiver wire quick to pick a Leaf up just for the week or something, they're great teams to pick up guys from just to rent them for a game or two. So that's what I think about the Leafs and similarly Colorado, but we'll get there.
Yeah. Okay, next we'll jump into the Oilers here. Again, they have some top-end elite talent in fantasy with McDavid, Draisaitl, Nuge. But there are a few good picks here this year that are going to be great for some of your casual leagues and keeper leagues. First one I got is Tyler Yamamoto. What a great partial season he had last year, 26 points in 27 games. I think he'll slot into the top 6 here. Easy pick. Someone you can get in your middle of the draft. And I think he just takes another step this year, especially with the Oilers. I think he puts up over 40 points, no problem. But I think he does just get lost in those earlier rounds with, Connor, Leon, Nuge, etc. But yeah, I think this is a great pickup. Second one, a bit more again of a gamble for a keeper and more of a keeper league pick, but I think Caleb Jones. I think he takes the step up into a top 4 role this year for the D, especially with Clefbaum being out of the year. The part where it gets a little tricky is the Oilers do have some good D prospects with Evan Bouchard and who's the other guy they just got? Broberg, maybe. But yeah, they do have some good D prospects, but we did see Jones play a good chunk of games last year, and I think he fits right in and plays the full season this year. And while he won't get you a ton of points in terms of goals and assists, he still puts up 2.5, 3 fantasy points per game from block shots and all your other fun production. And he's cheap, still entry level. So he's someone I would pick in any sort of keeper league or fantasy dynasty. The third one here, again, I think this one will probably actually be a popular play, but it's definitely a wild card. And that's a Puljujarvi pool party. I just think the Oilers, after him holding out and him being a first round pick, that they don't want to get screwed on this and they try their best to make it work out. Whether that means he plays on the first or second line, I think that's how he'll start the year. They don't want this to be a bust and they don't want it to come back and bite them. So I think that's what happens. And from what the reports are saying, he had a great year in Finland or wherever he was.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
And so I think he could, especially, anyone playing with Connor is going to put up a lot of points. So if he gets slotted there, and he is as good as they say he is now, easily 40 plus points, maybe even more. And I think that it is a bit of a wild card because no one really knows what his, ceiling is. But I think it's a risk worth willing to take. But yeah, who do you have for the Oilers here, Tarin?
My first one was Puljujärvi as well. I think with the Oilers, you have to target whoever gets to play in that top six with those two guys, right? Or those three guys. So you're going to see McDavid and Draisaitl center the top two lines typically. Sometimes they play together, but whoever that winger is just gets points because they're there. Because you got talent around you, you're going to get those auxiliary points. So Puljujärvi, I think, might slot into that role. Like you talked about, they inked him to a 2-year deal, so he is there now for at least 2 years if they don't decide to go away from him. He had 53 points in 56 games in Finland last year. So, yeah, I think that's a great play. And then the second guy is who I think might slot into the second line with Draisaitl, and that's Dominik Kahun. And the only reason he actually played amateur hockey with Draisaitl, so there's a bit of a connection. Kahun's always been in that second line, third line type guy. He kind of plays up there with usually the talent on the team. He did in Pittsburgh. He kind of slotted up to between the second and third line. And then I to be honest, I don't know where he played last year unless it was Pittsburgh. But yeah, I think that everybody's banking on Yamamoto, and I think we could see either that go well or bad. So I was kind of looking at any other piece because all the buzz right now is Yamamoto is going to be a high-ranking draft pick, so maybe play that he busts and grab a guy deeper that might replace him on that line. But yeah, that's all I really had for Edmonton.
Perfect. We'll move on to a short one here and move down Highway 2 to Calgary. Calgary is another interesting one where, they kind of have that core and they're almost in win now mode. They don't have, or to me, in terms of immediate fantasy, they don't have a lot of like sleeper / prospects coming up that will make an impact this year. The only one I have, and he will be a popular pick, is Markstrom. And the reason I have him is he's coming in from the Canucks. They obviously don't trust David Riddick to get the job done as the full-timer. So I think this is Markstrom's job to lose, and we see him play over 40 games this year. I think he will be one of the few goalies in the NHL that play the clear-cut lead role, and we see less of the tandem there. Now, I could be wrong, as the Flames tend to surprise people and have bad seasons too. But that's my thoughts on the Flames right now. As I would be taking Markstrom, as I think he gets the brunt of the workload, and kind of would be your clear-cut fantasy goalie, and really you wouldn't have to rely on hoping that if you have a 2-goalie league, that two of them get half the workload, because I think him and Freddie Anderson is another one that's going to get over 40 of the games played. So these are the type of goalies that you're going to take in around 2 or 3 and really get on them early.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, if you early look at Calgary's always been like one of the worst fantasy teams to target, even in DFS. They're just not a high producing offense. Even in good games, you'll see like a spike game here and there, but like overall over the season, none of these guys other than Goudreau 2 seasons ago really spiked in points or really hit that. They tend to play low scoring games and rely on their goaltending. So that's why I don't usually like to go to this team, but I picked a guy on the second line with Andrew Mangiovanni. He kind of played more last year. He's on the line 2, and that line 2 is the shutdown line. That's the Backlund line. They tend to play against the top line of the other team. And when you play a top line, typically they're not the best defensively. Some are, mind you, but some aren't. And so you tend to see more high danger chances if you're playing against the top line every time. So I kind of look to him as kind of a guy to fill late in your rounds. He's probably not even going to get drafted. So in case you need a guy on that second line. And then another guy, if you want some depth at D, I think Rasmus Anderson. They lost a lot of their D. They got rid of Brody. They got rid of the guy from Chicago before. I forget his name off the top of my head. He was playing third line, though. Gustafsson. But lots of chances for him to get involved in this offense. He's an offensive D-man, shoots a lot. He plays on power play too. He's playing on D-line too. So I don't know. He might see power play one time if Gio's out too. So that's what happened last year. So he plays that top line when Gio's hurt. So that's kind of my only look at Calgary. I don't like them for fantasy myself, but there's a few desirables.
Yeah. Okay. We have one more here. We'll go to the Winnipeg Jets. Bit of an interesting team here. They're another one that kind of has their, at least on forward, they have, and they're in a net, they have their core built. We have Ehlers, Wheeler, Scheifele, Laine, Kyle Connor. it's kind of solidified, but it gets very interesting on the back end. They have a very messy decor right now because no one really knows what it is or who it is, and it's wide open. Now, last year I took the flyer on the draft and took Neil Piank, got him in the later rounds, I believe in round 7 and 8 in both my casual drafts. And boy, did he step up last year to the plate. The clear-cut number 1D, 6 goals, 39 assists. A lot of chatter saying he will probably regress this season, and that was, a one-off. But I disagree just because of how that decor is, and they don't really have a lot of stability back there. So he's one who probably increases in terms of where he gets drafted this year just due to that season. But I think if you're looking for a clear number 1D that's going to be on the power play 1, he's a solid choice. He's affordable, and will probably be overlooked when you're comparing the other number 1D on other team. But he's really the only one I have on the Jets. But I do have some other defensemen to keep your eye on, just because I'm not really sure where they're going to slot into the lineup yet. But that's Samu Niku, however you say his name. And then Vil Hanola. I don't know how you say
it. Hanola, yeah.
And so those are my two to kind of keep your eye on to see how this decor shapes up. And where it goes on to, how it gets formed over the training camp here and throughout the season. But if you're playing keeper leagues, those two guys are maybe people who keep your eye on that might make their way into a position, a full-time role from camp.
Yeah, the Jets are always an interesting team. I kind of focused on this back end too, because you look at it and you're kind of confused as to what happened. Remember the Bufflin days, but the earlier reports at a camp are that Morrissey's going to be back and he's going to be playing the top line, top power play as well. So I think we have, whether Piank ends up fighting and winning that job or Morrissey takes it, I think both are great options to take in this defense core because they're both going to play the high minutes and the power play time. Although maybe Piank takes over on that role, but they're saying that he's going to come back. He was playing 23 minutes in his return from injury last year. He had, I think, 30 points in those games, and he didn't play too much. So he was kind of my look. And then in the top 6, I think the best play on this team, and everybody always runs to Scheifele and Wheeler. I think Ehlers is actually the best forward in this lineup. And so I kind of went there. I think he's kind of maybe not overlooked, but you can get him mid to like 4 or 5 round kind of guy, and he tends to he kind of bounces between the second and top line when Connor or whoever's playing bad, they kind of rotate those guys, but Ehlers tends to be the consistent, and he scores a lot. So him and Connor tend to score the goals the most out of that top 6. So I like going there, but that's kind of our Canada breakdown.
Yeah, we're going to do all 4 divisions here, the new divisions, a little bit of a preseason. It'll probably transition to more DFS as the season begins. But if people like the fantasy content too, we can kind of keep it mixed and do a mixture of them all as they all cross over. And, if you're learning about one, it probably is applicable to the others as well. But yeah, if you like this, give it a like. Let us know who you're picking or if we missed anyone that you are high on and think has good upside. And if you really like it, well, please subscribe so we know people like it. But yeah, thanks. And the next one we'll be dropping is the West Division. So stay tuned.
Yep.